Now, Brian, you're a patient man.
Thanks. Yeah, and when you're dealing with forestry, you have to be very patient indeed.
They're very slow growing.
Yeah. So, Co.Leitrim, there's members of the group here in the audience. We have one in particular who took a judicial review to the High Court himself to try and stop the land around his farm and the access to his house being planted. He didn't succeed, but he did succeed in ensuring that any future afforestation sites would have to put up a public notice. That's a very simple thing. It should happen. Should have happened long before that. But it just goes to show the power of an individual. And that started something then. We have other people. There's other people here who are in the Dáil committee with myself. We've been to the European Commission, to DG Agri, to discuss the issues while the forestry plan was looking for state aid exemption. So I suppose our group has been together formally for about 6-7 years now. We have been informing communities, informing government, informing policy, informing the media, the public, about what the issue is with forestry. There are multiple, and they've been referred to here in other areas, most recently about biodiversity loss, impact on HNV lands. We've been advocating for people and families, so we have people from all over the country. Most recently we had a couple from Clare up who recently, on Wednesday night was it, I can't remember, who met us to discuss a felling application, so the felling licence has been suspended. They live in the centre of an area that's been felled, and there was no communication at all with them from Coillte, who's supposed to be a state-owned organisation. We're trying to change public policy, and we could talk here all night about different aspects, but Coillte is an organisation, company owned by the state, Minister for Finance and the Minister for Agriculture, as I say, but set up by statute in 1988. They have a statutory remit for profit and profit only, to pay that profit back to the taxpayer, also for their own use. In 2021, they should have a remit for biodiversity, for community, social, for carbon. And that should be changed by legislation. And we're calling here tonight for our elected representatives to insist that that change is made in the next programme for government. It was promised in the last, didn't happen, it must. And they brought in Gresham House in the last, and that creates a furore. So we got involved in public protests. We took a coffin up Westmoreland Street, I think, or up to the Dáil. We have gone to Europe, as I said. We have been protesting at sites with some of the forestry companies. And there was a public protest up here which with the climate camp. So making a point about the replanting on these upland shale peat sites that should not be recurring. We're advocating for people, families and communities and farmers. Farming is our base here, our communities, where you have families growing up with young people going to the local school. Those schools are closing. The services are withdrawing because more and more and more and more and more of our land has been planted. We're submitting observations and appeals, and that's what's costing us a lot of money. And what happened in the last government, Green Party minister was over forestry, and because our campaign clogged the system of appeals and observations because it was free, they decided to take the battery out of the smoke alarm instead of looking for and change the legislation in that we now have to pay €20 to make an observation and 200 for an appeal. It dropped the numbers of appeals significantly. So instead of addressing the issue, they addressed the problem. So that's why we have tickets here tonight to help pay the government that we could say and protect our environment. Most of the issues we're dealing with are environmental issues in a very narrow silo that actually are considered by the Forest Service and the Forestry Appeals Committee, because it does not assess social impact, community impacts, the cumulative impact of forestry. So it's a very narrow window, but we're putting in appeals, observations and appeals, and I think, I don't know the figure, from 107, I think 108 appeals in the past 12 or 18 months, 107 of them have been turned down, remitted for serious mistakes or a series of mistakes. And that's only the appeals that have been submitted. So there's a huge percentage of them are problematic. And all of those that are getting through, thousands of them, I think Coillte submitted 1,800 applications in one day, licence applications. So you can see the volume of forestation, roads and felling that is happening, and there's major issues with them. So we're dealing with that through our paying for it and dealing with it through our observations and appeals. We meet every 2 weeks and we look at what we're doing next. And it's mainly those appeals are mainly based on very detailed technical issues around the process, but also around the sites where these are and protecting high nature value lands, biodiversity, peatlands, species, wetlands. So there's major issues. We could talk here for the night about those issues. We're involved in practical activities. We've actually bought land, and half of it, about 30 acres, about half of it is under commercial Sitka spruce, and the other half is natural woodland. So we're using that as a sort of a way to educate other people and to engage in showing what communities can actually do. So we're really stretching ourselves, and again, that's why we need you to help. We have to pay for that land. We're building national and international networks, so there are 4 or 5 other safe groups. We're actually members going down to Wicklow next week for a residential. And as I said earlier, we're fundraising. So what are the issues? That's all we're doing. So what are the issues? The issues are that we have an extractive industry that's investor-led. And that can be investors in Ireland who are farmers in other areas, burying money, building in pension plans, trying to offset, sacrificing Leitrim land so that they can do all that. It can be international finance houses. It can be corporates from Ireland. And it's largely extractive. It is extractive because it's taken timber. Nobody's interested particularly in the native trees, the native woodlands, except local people and farmers. We don't see corporates coming in to invest in large-scale native woodlands, for instance. So we have major issues there with that. It's corporate-led, sacrificing our communities and land. The environmental damage is very significant, and we could go through the list. Water, soil, as in peat, but other soils as well. Landscape impacts. People cite mental health issues with the trees coming up around them, the darkness and daylight, but also when the felling happens, it's a very, very large, impactful, damaging activity. And the biggest issue we have when we started, and still to this day, is the social and community impact. Because if you plant 1 farm, 2 farms, 3 farms, 4 farms, exactly what Paddy said earlier, that somebody will come to you and say, we don't need straw next year, we don't need a contractor, we're not going into the co-op to buy our fencing material, we don't want the vet or the AI man anymore in this farm. And if you do that, farm after farm after farm after farm, for whatever reason, you just destroy your economy. Our rural economy in Leitrim is built on that, and in the west, and that's where all the forestry has been pushed. So there's no land use plan at all to say we want farming to retain and remain sustainable in this area, that we want biodiversity on this land, that we want high nature value land, that we want solar farms in this land, that we want wind farms in this, that we keep this for landscape character, water quality, and forestry, certain types of forestry. So at that, the issue is forestry is exempted development. So we as citizens of Leitrim have no say in the democratic input to that because it's not within our planning authority. It's decided by foresters who are trained foresters. They have no social community remit, and they are based in Wexford, and they look at it purely from a timber. Many of them come out of the timber industry, and they'll say, okay, licence granted. We need to bring forestry, and it was a feeling for Gael government and minister, junior minister in the department that removed the last element of planning, in I think it was 2019, I'm not sure if Kieran could correct, but removed forest roads and took them out of the planning system in 2019. So we want to see democratic input, and we do want, and I know Martin referred to it at the very beginning, and Marion, that they supported a bill to bring, I think it was over 5 hectares back into the planning. That must be revised. Yeah. It must come back into the planning process so that we can, as citizens, as elected councillors, as a planning authority, have a say in what our county looks like in 100 years from now. When you plant land, the cycle is 35 years, and when you plant it the first time, you sign up to planting it twice, so 70-year cycle. And when that land comes out, it's effectively worthless after 70 years. None of us will see the two. Well, I've seen a cycle and a cycle and a half at this stage, and I'm not that old. That land that was planted in 1986 has still not been felled. But so we want this issue of exempted development dealt with, and democratic input by ourselves into what kind of county we have. The licensing process, as I mentioned, is very flawed. Doesn't take account of any of these social environmental issues. If you plant 50 hectares, you have to get an environmental impact assessment, can cost up to €30,000. But what you can do is break that up and plant it. Two elements of 25, and 25 here, 25 there, 25 there, and next thing you have 1,000 acres, no environmental impact assessment. Land use planning, there must be land use plans on a county basis. It hasn't happened. It was talked about, and there is some development moving it, but it has not happened. And there's more and more pressure on land, solar farms. I suppose the key that we see is that our local farmers are very seriously disadvantaged against the forestry investors. So there's no retirement scheme. So farmers come to the end of their life, they're not able to farm anymore, they can't get out, they can't get a decent living retirement. But you have forestry investors coming in, planting for their pensions. So we need a retirement scheme for farmers. The environmental schemes have to reflect the value of what farmers are doing, and they have to be paid for. Farmers must be paid. If you're not going to farm the land with your stock, if you're going to farm it for biodiversity, you should be paid properly and at a level that reflects the value of that biodiversity. That's not happening. And to protect that environmental element that we have. So farmers, a system to support farmers, the forestry investors, the state will do the environmental impact assessments for them through the ecologists that are now hired. They'll provide the licences like confetti at a wedding. They'll grant aid the planting and pay for the yearly contributions up to 15 or 20 years, and they'll give you a 0% tax when you harvest. None of those things are available to farmers who are farming, to be honest. There's a huge diversity, and that's creating an issue with land. And there is one person in the audience here who had to put their hand in their pocket to keep the forestry back from their front door, and they had to pay way over the odds for that land because these investors are getting huge amounts of state money. So they were forced by that to put their hand in the pocket and pay way over the odds so that they could have a life on that house. Okay. There are a lot of issues, and I've said what we want to see, a few of them. The community and social impacts are massive. They're not addressed at all in any way. Closing services, haulage on the roads and the damaged roads and bridges. There's so many issues. And I'm not sure. We have to see some sort of commitment to addressing these issues. And I don't think many people really realise the level of impact on a place like Leitrim. And there are many other places the same is happening right across the west. North Roscommon, South Sligo, East Clare, North Kerry, Wicklow, and many, many other areas where these things. So we are on the front end of it, I suppose, but it takes so long to get people to hear what we're trying to say. It's a very complex issue, and unlike the other issues here, we don't have fracking in Ireland. Fracked gas is still not here to any great extent, if it is. the wind farm on Dormont is not actually, well, there's 2 turbines, 3 turbines up there, but it's not there yet, and the gold mining is not here, but forestry is here in a massive way, and it has to be managed back. And I think our government and our politicians locally have helped in a great way, but it's still very difficult to be heard, and we want to be heard in the next programme for government as it's been developed, and those issues that I mentioned specifically, bringing back into the planning, and all those issues need to be addressed now. And before you leave, we do want you to help us with the costs. So there are tickets, and you'll have to buy a book each. And the audience has been halved here. Like, we missed a lot of people that are already gone. But we do need your help, and we need the money.
Are you lobbying for ticket sales?
No, it's Christmas. I'll tell you something. The prizes are exceptional. €1,000, but everything else here, the Landmark Hotel, breakfast and evening meal, a hamper from Leitrim, a beehive, you can have your own bees, a shed distillery, an evening meal in the Red Bank. All these are Leitrim based and food. So yes, you'll have your say.
Okay, I mean, the theme here tonight is that there's huge damage being done in Leitrim, and we've only covered 4 issues. Our problem was keeping it to 4. And the theme seems to be the same. And in a sense, Brian, your input there, like all the others mentioned, loss of diversity, impact on populations, destruction, sort of loss. These are the words that are throughout the whole night. And Brian, your presentation is sort of saying forestry is actually going deeper in all of those. It has legislation that is working against it. And what I'm hearing from everyone tonight is that you have to fight so hard in your own communities to sort of work against the destructive, the industrial, sort of the large scale. So I hope you're getting that message loud and clear. Now, to honour the forestry, I think there's a few comments. So can I hear any comments?
Yeah, well, I'm chairman of the group, but I didn't want to sit up there because I thought it was nearly top heavy with politicians or people who want to get into that space. But I just want to say, since we started out in almost in 2017, when we started out, it was a huge challenge for us because we did not know until we got ourselves organised how to come at it. But we found out that every time we were making the appeals, that the government was coming under pressure. They had 1 ecologist for the whole of Ireland, for the whole of the 26 counties in 2017. They have over 30 today. They did nothing right. It was like a juggernaut. We threw a spanner into the works. We have it slowed down, but we are appealing all the time. This year so far, we have appealed, we've spent 6,500 on appeals. That's money that we get from the people in Leitrim buying tickets, supporting us at Churchgate collections, supporting us at different functions. But we have a mammoth task because the minute we take our foot off the pedal, they're going to keep planting. But there's one common denominator. We're all interlinked because if they get the land, they'll mine it, they'll frack it, they'll put wind turbines, they'll do whatever they bloody want. The other thing is, we talked about it, someone said there about 36% of the land, the available agricultural land is planted. Actually, the tops of the mountains, parts of them shouldn't have been planted, but we'll still be available farming land that people can actually farm. That is over 70,000 acres. How many farms, how many farm families, how many people have gone? There are whole town lands that there's nobody living in now. And if you went back and took a look at 100 years ago, there could have been up to 100 people in them. And one of them is out the road here, Fahery. And it has to be, there's another appeal in for Fahery. There's nobody living in Fahery anymore. And there was, you know what I mean, there was 100 people. And these are things that we're losing our heritage, we're losing our culture, we're losing our biodiversity. We have the best land for higher nature value lands in the country is in North Leitrim and part of South Leitrim. We have it, but keep planting, put the people out, and they will get access. Once they get us out, they'll have access to everything else. But not as long as any of us and save Leitrim and our children.
So if I summarise what you're saying is that the people of Leitrim are experiencing this influx that sort of is coming from where? And sort of what are you asking these people here tonight if they're elected to do?
Well, from when I got elected to Leitrim County Council 10 years ago, it took many years till we got Leitrim County Council on the same hymn sheet that they make a lot of submissions, but they never follow through with appeals. They have started to follow through with appeals. They need to do more. But what I'm asking is, at what point can any politician stand up and say in the Dáil that Leitrim has had enough? We have 20% of our county planted. As I said, 36% of our land. How much more? We cannot afford to lose. We're the most rural county. Over 3,000 farmers are in Leitrim, and on small farms. They have a right to live. Our children have a right to a future in this county. So they have to be honest with us and say that they're going to listen and take it back, because, as I said, we're all affected. The fracking, the mining, and the wind farms.
Okay.
We're on the same boat.
I think you're getting the message. Your comment?
Yeah, right, I don't need the microphone, thank you. Brian's late father was very instrumental in this back in the mid-80s, I remember well, mid-80s. In any of the items spoke about tonight, there's the socio-economic impact needs to be done on the likes of this. What gets me, and I don't care who's in government, I wish every single one of you, anyone who puts their person forward to get elected, I wish them very, very well. And as is said, heavy lies the head that wears a crown. Massive responsibility on governments to get it right. But one thing that I think very strange is, why does Ireland feel, or we're made feel, subservient by not having the European average in afforestation? I think it's appalling. This model is different in Europe. We have the family farm situation in Ireland, the average of 27, 28, 32 hectares, whatever. It varies per region, okay? And I think it's most unusual why it's so often said that, oh, we're made feel very inadequate, that we're not near the European average. Who said we should denude the countryside of people, most important resource? And regarding any of the issues dealt with tonight, all crucially important, there's scientific and engineering solutions to various aspects regarding, for instance, mercury that's used in your extraction of gold. I'm learning a lot. We're all learning tonight. That's actually in another department in met stations that it's been banned. You know, they're using the electronic instead. That's one area where, and yet they're prepared to use it in extraction of gold. The late Michael Fox, the Leitrim man who set up the Leitrim Garrison, credit to those people, a man from this very town. I think we'll keep the flag flying for Leitrim. And I'll finish by saying that balanced regional development, Marion here often spoke about that in recent decades, and no doubt it's good common sense. Balanced regional development. I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you.
And keep the good work up, all you great people.
Yeah, I just want to say that, this has gone on so long. In the early 80s, myself and the late Kevin McGoldrick and Drummer were taken to court for obstruction and had to give an undertaking that we wouldn't do it again by a guy from Wicklow, Mr. Hussey, if anybody can remember him. Brian Hussey, who was involved in private forestation. So it's gone on so long, and what the most thing that's frustrating me as a member of Leitrim County Council, and Martin touched on it earlier, is the fact that we have put motion after motion to the various ministers of different governments down through the years. Why it is about that the planting and felling must come onto the planning laws. And it is so, I just get so annoyed every time I think of it, because everything else is under planning. If you change the windows on the house, if you put whatever you do with it, or build a small extension, do anything, you come onto the full rigors of the planning. And we brought Coolidge to a meeting to discuss other issues with them. And I put that to them. And they really, what was very, very clear from them was, one of them looked at the other, they sort of laughed at each other, one of them said, that won't happen. So they were so sure that the government were not going to give in. And I think if the candidates tonight could give that commitment, that not only will they support that, why would it not come under the planning laws?
So what's the commitment you're asking for?
I'm asking a commitment that the people that are running for the Dáil will give a commitment that if elected, they will campaign vigorously to have afforestation, planting and felling brought under the full rigours of the planning laws.
Okay. And your response? I'm not giving them out to each of you for your response. I think there's a very simple way to show your response. And
Yeah, the love. I mean,
the love.
yeah,
Yeah.
already put the motion.
Already. But, okay. And, yeah, sorry, I've one comment here and then I'll come to you. And then I'm closing the comments.
Well, half my question's already been answered. So I'm wondering, can any of you here tonight make a commitment that if you get into the Dáil, you will cap the amount of land in Leitrim that can be planted by Quilcha and other organisations like that?
It requires a little longer of an answer than just a yes or no. Sorry to say that, but really what it needs to come back to is the point that was made by Brian, is that Quilcha needs to take more into account than just make a profit. They actually need to look at the environmental impact of what they do, the social impact of what they do, and the community impact of what they do. And if we can make that happen, I think we can make progress with regard to Quilcha, who are a state public. But the biggest problem in Leitrim is not Quilcha, in fairness. The biggest problem in Leitrim is private afforestation. And private afforestation needs to come under planning laws. And then Leitrim County Council have a role.
Aontú for the last 2 years have been trying to develop a forestry and timber industry policy where we would model our industry on the type of industry that we would find in the Skåne region of Sweden. And the basis of the agricultural, the forestry and timber industry in this part of Sweden is that the forestry industry is actually part of the agricultural industry. It's the farmer who actually is the forester. And they engage both in forestry and they engage in farming on the same land. And they use appropriate land within their farm holding for forestry, and they use the other appropriate land within their land for agricultural purposes. But they also extend it beyond that, because they also, as we did, for example, with our dairy industry, they actually developed forestry cooperatives. And the big idea behind this is, and this is one of the problems I have with what happens here in Leitrim, and I see the trucks with the log timber heading out of the county. A couple of them even tipped over there down beside Drumsna a couple of years ago. And what they happen is they were just getting the logs, and the logs have been taken out, and everything else is crap, and it's thrown on the ground, and the land is looking in an absolute mess. What happens in Sweden, however, is that the farmer, he does the thinnings, and he takes his thinnings back either to his own compound, and he dries them there, or he brings them to the co-op. The co-op dries the thinnings, and they chip them, and they turn it into biofuels. They take down the timber, and they turn the timber for the local construction industry. They do it for the local by housing and fuel, and for carpentry, etc., and for furniture. And what is happening in Leitrim is we're producing a great crop, and we're getting none of the added value. It's going onto a train, sometimes it's even going the whole way into Dublin Port and being put on a boat. So the model that we have would be that each of the counties would have an appropriate level of afforestation. One of the big problems we also have is when the forestry people are looking at forestation, they're looking at the quality of the land based on a national guideline. All lands in Ireland are classified, and we have more of the poor classified lands. Therefore, their idea is that this land is suitable for forestry because it's the low classified land. What they're not taking into account is that each county has a different grade of classified lands of different quality. And what might be considered a poor piece of land in the Midlands, where you've got good quality land, is not bad land. We don't get it here, but what they would call bad land in the Midlands would be good agricultural land for us. And we have to have that put into a land use approach. And yes, it definitely has to be a land use approach. And for example, and just one last item, when I was working in Leitrim County Council, we had a situation where we had actually designated lands above a certain level that should not be afforested. And we actually asked the department to not insist on the regrowing of trees on that land afterwards, to actually bring the tree line down. And they said, well, like, why? But I said, because this is in our development plan, but we had to approve it for them, tell them it was okay. And they said, I said, no, you have to say, yes, you can fell the trees if you don't replant. And there was an absolute stalemate. But in the end, those particular trees weren't replanted. They turned a blind. And that's one of the things that we have to stop. We have to stop insisting that the land has to be permanently put into this use.
Thank you. Okay, I hear from this that there are other models that we don't seem to be looking at. But Brian, I'm going to come back to you and just, is there one thing that you would say to the people here tonight, if elected, what you really, really want them to do for you? And just keep it very short, please.
There's certainly not one. There's many, and all of them are equally important. And I have gone through them all before, so that they're clear enough. I think that, Coillte is part of the problem. Coillte is also going to be part of the solution. And so the reform of Coillte is an absolute. Proper support for farmers in places like this, and for a land use plan, statutory land use plan. If it's decided by agreement and it's not statutory required, and that it isn't followed or taken into account in licensing, it's a waste of time.
Thank you. Okay, now...
I'm sorry. I burst. I held me wish. Now, lads and lasses, he may not know me, but I'm an original. You give me the right now, will you? And that's called Trolley Glass Woods, just down from Northern Boy. Beautiful, unspoiled area.
Well, wave this way.
And long may it bloody last. And between Treasure Leitrim and all the other things. But anyhow, I got a call. Safely to me, come on. Anyhow, I landed into Sligo. I learned an awful lot. And believe it or not, our tiny bit of the narrowest part of Leitrim, North Leitrim, is divided into two culture segments. You have a Bucky Hoy from Tipperary up in Ballybuffet, 1 second, and the other buck, Mullingar, and he lives in Dromahare, I may add. But anyhow, what I'm saying is we're falling between the stools. Greenbelt Forestry and all those other people, they lambasted our, and I feel so passionate about it, and I see what the lads and, well, I do try my best in my own way, but it's...
Sorry, okay, everyone, I have to bring the proceedings to an end. I have that Kerry clock, I must get rid of it. I think the message very clearly tonight, and I said what we were interested in, what we were bringing here was the place that we all call home, the planet. And you can hear from the people here tonight, from all walks of Leitrim. And Leitrim hasn't a huge population, but the message is strong and clear that the industrial type attitude, the lack of commitment to what local communities are saying, but at the same time acknowledging your support, that we're looking for going forward, if you're elected, that you will take the issues with a new value and hold them much more dear, maybe, than what governments and your parties have done before. Now, I would like to thank each and every one of you. I really appreciate your effort of being here tonight. I also congratulate your endurance. You know, you'll need it, but thank you so much for staying here to the bitter end. I would like to thank all of the groups for their contribution. You've no idea of the work that goes on behind the scenes, you know, so I was grateful that they had a platform here tonight to sort of let you know, how much they need your help to do what they're doing, which is looking after Leitrim for this generation and future generations to come. I would like to thank each and every one of you for all your participation, for your, your patience, your questions, your interest. I'd like to thank Mary Fair for the lovely tea and cakes, Joseph up in sound, Brendan here in the Glens Centre. You've all been so supportive, and thank you so much. Sorry, anybody who hasn't bought a ticket, Brian will be standing at the door, and unless you show evidence, you won't be allowed to leave.
Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, each and every one of you.